Why does Pixar struggle so much with its sequels? Since the movie was first announced, Inside Out fans have been waiting on the edge of their seats to find out if the follow-up to the beloved 2015 film is actually good. And much of this anxiety stems from the studio's track record with sequels. If you were to ask a group of people what their favorite Pixar movie is, I'm sure most of them wouldn't give the same answer. They might choose something like Finding Nemo, Monsters Inc., WALL-E, Ratatouille, but I've yet to meet a single person whose favorite Pixar movie is Finding Dory or Monsters University. Although I have met a lot of Cars 2 fans, which is objectively the worst one. Why do you guys like Cars 2 so much? But that's not to say that Pixar sequels are bad. Generally, most of them are enjoyable, but they never seem to reach the top tier status of their original films, except for, of course, Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3. But why is that? Before we go there, let's look at Pixar's biggest release from 2015. No, I was actually talking about this one, but that raises a good point. Let's back it up even further. In 2011, Pixar released Cars 2, immediately preceding Toy Story 3 and becoming the first Pixar sequel outside of the Toy Story franchise. It didn't go over very well, and was the lowest grossing US release since A Bug's Life in 1998. Following that was 2012's Brave, which garnered some mixed reviews, and 2013's Monsters University, which again, And these back-to-back-to-back middling releases felt worrisome for a studio that previously seemed to never miss, especially when Pixar had even secured a Best Picture nomination at the Oscars with Toy Story 3, which shockingly to this day is the last time an animated film was nominated in this category. But then finally, 2 years after Monsters University, Pixar releases its biggest critical and financial success in half a decade with Inside Out. And then a few months later released The Good Dinosaur, which flopped with both fans and critics. But why was Inside Out so successful compared to The Good Dinosaur and the 3 films that came before it? Inside Out is one of the most unique concepts that the studio has ever explored, not only because of its personification of emotions, but also from its exploration of things like core memories, trains of thoughts, and of course, Bing Bong, an imaginary friend who hadn't been played with in several years and was slowly fading into obscurity. And while yes, the death of Bing Bong was one of the biggest gut punches to happen in a Pixar film, the emotional depth of this movie felt pretty basic, especially for a movie about emotions. Yes, joy and sadness are opposites, and you need both of them. It's okay to experience a range of emotions. It's a good message for children to hear, but it's done with very little subtlety. But that didn't really matter, because the concept was cool and its story beats were very captivating. Which makes sense why this film garnered more success than Brave or The Good Dinosaur, or frankly any original Pixar movie since 2015, save for maybe Coco. But I think the failures of every other Pixar sequel are partially explained by a hit like this, and as previously mentioned, Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3. 1995's Toy Story was not only the first Pixar movie, but the first computer animated movie ever made. And when Disney asked them to follow it up with a sequel, they didn't want to use the typical direct-to-home video model. If they were going to do it, they wanted to do it right. But since the magic of introducing a new world to audiences would now be lost, they needed to find new ways to explore the concepts of the story even further. It needed to add interesting elements that supplement this world, making it feel fuller and richer, which of course they succeeded. They told an emotionally profound story while adding an interesting conflict and protagonist. And plus it gave us this scene. I mean, this movie is such a masterpiece. But the craziest thing was doing it again with Toy Story 3. But of course, the story works so well because unlike every addition to the Cars franchise, which just raises more questions about how this world works, Toy Story 3 actually feels like it's answering a question that naturally arises from the presentation of this concept, even if it gets pretty dark. What happens to a toy when a kid grows up? What does the concept of death even look like to a toy? We get all of these questions answered while also resonating with audiences who grew up with the first 2 films, but now in a brand new way, while also being accessible enough for younger audiences to understand these concepts even if they haven't really experienced it themselves yet. It was the natural next step for this story to take, and felt like a perfect send-off for one of the most successful trilogies in movie history. And then they made a 4th one, but let's not talk about that. So when going into Inside Out 2, fans were obviously hoping for something more like Toy Story 3 and not one of the other Pixar sequels that didn't really add much or felt like it was retreading the same water. Thankfully, Inside Out 2 was given the perfect setup right at the end of the first film. We had just seen Riley go through metaphorical and literal emotional conflict when her family moved across the country. Naturally, the next big emotional conflict would happen during puberty. The newest film follows Riley during a weekend at hockey camp, and while on paper that might might seem like a less important or less interesting topic to follow, the catalyst that's setting off the chain of events here is entirely internal now, making a pretty average event seem like it's the most important thing in the world, which, yeah, happens all the time during puberty, and the film did a pretty good job of portraying that. And on the whole, I'll say this: Inside Out 2 is the best sequel Pixar has made since Toy Story 3. It's not a perfect sequel, and it doesn't really fall within that top tier of Pixar movies, but it's still significantly better than a majority of the studio's recent output. The biggest new concept that this film is exploring is called the sense of self, and I really like the way it was visually depicted, but I feel like it didn't add anything new. The ultimate conclusion that they come to is that the negative emotions are just as important as the positive emotions, which is, yeah, exactly what the outcome was in the first movie. I still liked what they were doing with it, but at times it just felt a bit too familiar. The treatment of the character anxiety was something that absolutely needed to be handled well, and thankfully it was. The panic attack scene is now probably my favorite in the panic attack animated film cinematic universe, but it works so well because of the way in which it's personified. And just like with sadness in the first film, they posit that it's something that will be with you forever, but you need to find ways to cope with it in a healthy manner. And given that a look inside Riley's mom's head shows that sadness is the main emotion running the show, and likewise with anger for Riley's father, you can assume that there will be times in Riley's life in which another emotion may once again take control of the board away from joy. And that's okay, but finding a balance between all of these emotions is the best path forward. That concept is, for the most part, explained well. Of course, it could have been done better, but that could get too dark or complicated for a Pixar movie. So while there are elements like this that are definitely improvements and even add more emotional depth than the first film ever had, I think the exploration and expansion of the world could have gone farther. I mean, there's still enough there to chew on, and overall it scores a passing grade. Like, we see Imagination Land hijacked by anxiety. Characters like Bluefy and Land Slashblade provide some great jokes and an excuse to incorporate different styles of animation. The pouchy jokes fell a bit flat after a while, but I mean, I still like them. Throughout the movie, we see a stream of consciousness, which is pretty cool, but it just reminded me too much of the train of thought from the first film. And unfortunately, there's no big gut-punching bing bong death moment. I don't really feel like this story needed it, but for some people it might make it harder to like it as much as the first one. But I think audiences are generally going to enjoy this, and I think it's going to make a lot of money. I just hope this doesn't deter Pixar from doing what they do best, which is making new and innovative films. But something tells me that the suits at Pixar are just going to see this movie's success as a sign for more sequels, and we might end up with like a Cars 4 or a Finding Marlin or something, I don't know. But thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Inside Out 2, and let me know what your favorite Pixar movie is. Just don't tell me it's Cars 2.